Hi, this is Crystal Cyrus from the OOTW podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our featured presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 177, Unstoppable Movie Review. Hey, I'm Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers. This, of course, is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Derek, how's it going?
Great, Chris. How's it going with you tonight?
Good. I'm good. I'm always good.
That's good to hear. I mean, I'm very happy to say that I got my first COVID shot this week, and I'm glad we got to the point where it was, if you're over 40 and you want the shot, you can get it, and I wanted it, and I got it. So nice. Pretty pleased. Most of my peer group is around the same age, so I've been seeing all the posts show up on social media. So we're all getting vaccinated with our first shot, and we're one step closer to being in a world where we're going to be allowed to travel again and go on vacations and see our favorite sports teams perform live and go to Las Vegas and get on cruise ships and all that stuff. I mean, we're still a ways from there, but this is a first step in that direction. So very happy.
And take in lots of pop culture. You know, speaking of which, what pop culture have you partaken in this past week, my friend?
So I had a chance to watch a few older movies. I mean, older, not that much older. And I think they're all actually from the 90s now that I'm looking at them.
Is it older by your definition or older by my definition?
By my definition.
Two different
by my
things.
definition.
Yeah.
So first one is one of my, we'll call it guilty pleasure movies. It's one of those ones whenever it's on TV, I kind of have to finish watching it. And it's The Birdcage with Robin Williams and Nathan Lane.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's one of my wife's all-time favorite movies, and we watch it together all the time. It's very quotable. It's really funny. Have
it was just the original Casual Fall from the
Casual
late
Fall
70s?
a long time ago. When I worked at Blockbuster, I rented it one time just so that I could have that context because The Birdcage was a relatively new release at the time. But so we watched The Birdcage. It holds up. There's a few things that are little sort of, but by the 90s, I thought it was kind of a more progressive movie given when it came out. I mean, some of the portrayals and the discussion about gay characters and LGBT, maybe not as I don't want to say politically correct, but not as accurate as maybe it could be or should be if it was remade today. But I really like the way that it came out. I think it's a very it's certainly funny, and I think it's fairly even-handed the way it's portrayed. Second movie I saw, Tremors. You ever seen Tremors?
Yes, it's awesome. Fred Ward from
Remo Williams.
Remo Williams is in it, and Kevin Bacon. It's those worms under the ground, and Peter Gross.
And it's
really good.
Dad from Family Ties.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's really good. Like it's a low budget. Well, it probably wasn't even that low budget, but it's like it plays like a low budget creature feature. And I hadn't seen it in a long time, and it just were like my wife and I flicking through the channels on the weekend. I'm like, oh my God, Tremors is coming on, and she's like, oh, we're not gonna watch that. I'm like, well, let's just leave it here while we think about something better to do. And then we started playing on our phones, and the movie comes on, and the next thing you know, 20 minutes have passed. We're both riveted by the movie. I guess we'll watch this. It was fun. It holds up pretty well given what it is. And then the third one is the one I sort of really want to talk about. It's a movie called Sliding Doors from the 90s starring Gwyneth Paltrow. Have you ever seen it?
No.
Okay, we're definitely going to do this on a movie review in a while because I just watched it, so I don't necessarily want to do it right now, but maybe like 6 months from now. Gwyneth Paltrow has never looked more beautiful than she does in this movie. Oh my God, like just probably one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen on screen in this movie. She is just wow. I can't describe how awesome she is. And she's talented. She can perform. I mean, a year later, she wins an Oscar for Shakespeare in Love. Mm-hmm. She can act. And this movie is great. The idea is in the first 5 minutes of the movie, she goes to work, she gets fired. And when she goes to go home to catch the subway to go home, she misses the train because literally the sliding doors close in her face. Then you see an alternate version where she actually makes the train and she gets on before the doors close. And then you have two parallel stories happening about how her life is different simply because in one version she caught the train and in one version she didn't. And it's just very clever the way the story is crafted. The story's good. The performances are good. The supporting cast is fantastic. It's really good. I hadn't seen it since it first came out in the I guess it's late 90s. I think it's like 97, 98. It is really good. It really held up. And wow, I could not take my eyes off Gwyneth Paltrow. She is spectacularly breathtaking in this film.
Nice.
And that was it for me. Those were other than the one we're about to talk about, those were the three that I had a chance to watch this week. No, unfortunately, no documentaries.
Oh, okay. Derek, okay, so I have something. I usually don't. I usually just gloss over and I go right to my dumb dad joke and we move on. But I actually have something because I actually had an opportunity this week to watch something. So I have a question for you, Derek. What do you think of when I say the Bee Gees?
The Bee Gees? I think of disco.
Disco, right? So
yeah, Saturday Night Fever, Staying Alive.
Okay, the reason I ask is this past week I actually watched a documentary.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
So this documentary that I watched is called How to Mend a Broken Heart. And it was a documentary about the Bee Gees. So until I watched this, whenever I thought of the Bee Gees, I used to think of, like you, Staying Alive, and disco. And I always think, I always think they always had that slow song too, that How Deep Is Your Love. Yeah. But that was pretty much it. That's all I thought.
Oh, no.
That they did. And boy, was I wrong. So they actually formed in 1958. And they were writing songs and singing together as a group all through the 60s and 70s. And they had a pile of hits. And on the documentary, they kept playing songs. And I was like, oh, I know that song. They did that? Oh, they did that too? Like, I was just getting blown away. And so it was really cool. They're in this recording studio and they're recording an album. It was like in the mid 70s or something. And they were doing this song called Nights on Broadway. And they're recording it. And the producer turns to them and he's like, we need something in this song. We need some background sounds, like to punch it up. And so Barry Gibb starts singing like some la la la's or something like that. But he uses a falsetto. And everybody in the studio just froze. And even he couldn't believe what was coming out of him. And he didn't even know he could sing like that. And the band liked it so much that they decided that they would base their music around this newly discovered falsetto, and it changed music forever, And then someone wrote an article for New York Magazine called The Tribal Rituals of the New Saturday Night. And it got optioned. So they were going to make a movie about, the disco scene in New York. So they hired the Bee Gees to write some songs for it. And it became the highest grossing album of all time. And that was back in 1978, like a soundtrack, which is unheard of at the time to become, that successful. At one point, they had 6 of the top 10 songs on the charts. And they started ranking up there with the Beatles in terms of all this record-breaking success they had. And as you know, Derek, when anything gets too popular, there's copycats, and knockoffs. And the same happened with disco. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, came out with this horrific song called Disco Duck. You remember that one, Derek?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it Rick Dees who did the Rick Dees Weekly Top 40? I think that's who it was.
Oh, you might be right, So this song Disco Duck comes out, and then that, led to a bunch of backlash. And there was this DJ in Chicago. He kind of reminded me of like Rush Limbaugh, who spun records. And he organized this hate rally at Comiskey Park in Chicago for people to come and burn disco records. But the thing is, disco started out as, it was like a music form in the black and the gay community. And it turned out that people came to this rally, not just to burn disco records, but they were burning R&B albums and pretty much anything that were made by black artists. And as we've learned over the past few years, once again, when you peddle in hate, it brings out some of the worst people in society. And it basically caused the Bee Gees to have to go into hiding because they got all these death threats, right? Because they were the forefront of disco, right? And so they had to go into hiding and they couldn't sing. And as much as they love singing, their real passion was actually songwriting. So
yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure they have a tremendous catalog of songs they've written for other people.
They did. So they started writing all these songs for other artists, like songs like If I Can't Have You and Grease from the movie. That song was them.
Yep.
And Islands in the Stream by Dolly Parton and
Kenny Rogers.
They
Love
wrote that.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
It was just fascinating. And I just didn't realize how big and how popular and how influential that they were as singers and songwriters. It was an awesome documentary. So it's called How to Mend a Broken Heart. It was on HBO. It was just so good. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think my wife and my brother had both watched it. It came out a couple months ago, and I think they both watched it right away. And I'm like, I enjoy the Bee Gees music, but I have to be in the right mood. Like a lot of people, disco's not my thing, but I like when you're in the right mood, you want dancey music. You want something with the beat. Like when I'm working out, disco's great. Hip hop's great. Because it's got that beat to it that you need. If you're working out, you want to keep that pace. So there's definitely a time and a place for it, but it's certainly not the first thing I pull from. So I sort of went, not really my thing. But
I'm not a disco guy. I've always liked classic rock and stuff. Like I would never be a disco guy, but I was just fascinated by their story. And kind of
and their talent, right?
Yeah. Oh, they're very talented.
Yeah. And it's like, even though I don't necessarily care for what I understand to be the Bee Gees style of music, I can certainly appreciate the talent it takes to do what they did. And I can appreciate the impact they had on the musical arts, given where they were, when they were, what they did, the ups, the downs, the highs of disco, and even the whole disco sucks and the thing in Chicago, like that's all a part of the history of music. Mm-hmm. And the way music changed in the 80s based on that backlash of disco, even though you may not agree with how everything came together with the whole burning of the records, it caused the art form to change drastically. And I love what it became. I don't necessarily love how and why it became that, but it again, art will be reflective of the time and the culture. And so from that point of view, I can certainly appreciate and respect what they did. So maybe I'll have to give it a try. I mean, you know me, I love documentaries and I'm always looking for the next great one. So maybe I'll put that on my watch list and try and get to it in the next couple of weeks. Well, you've given me lots of ideas for documentaries, so I gave you one. So there. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Another thing that I want to give you.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Okay, Derek, since we're doing a movie tonight about a train, I thought I would do a train joke. Okay? Derek, why couldn't the train conductor remember how many trains he derailed last year? Jeez, I have no idea. Because it's hard to keep track. Oh, man. Like, where do you find this garbage? It's hard to keep track. It's hard to keep track. Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean.
There's a lot of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Smokey in the Bandit shirt for you.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad. Boof from Teen Wolf.
Hot as a pistol.
Wow. I know. That's pretty amazing.
I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons nerd.
It's a shock that you never got more girls in high school.
Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean. Calm blue ocean. I don't know. That's a lot to unpack, Chris. Give me a second here.
All right, Derek, it was over to you this week, and you came up with Unstoppable from 2010. So maybe we'll get into the movie. We're going to get into lots of details of the film tonight. But maybe just to kick off, why this movie? Why do you want me to watch this? Okay. Before I sort of get into it directly, I want to say I've finally had a chance to go back and listen to the last 5 or 6 episodes of our show. I usually listen to our show, but I like to give it a couple of weeks so that it's doesn't seem as fresh. And because I listen to a lot. I don't really get a chance to go back and listen. I just don't have enough time on my hands. So what do we sound like? Do we sound like a couple of dorks? Well, at least one of us does. Of course. Yeah. I have a funny feeling it's me. Well, hey, you draw your own conclusions. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so if I give it a couple of weeks before I go back to listen to our show,
I don't want to say it's like it's new, but I don't necessarily remember all the nuances, even for the parts that where I was the speaker. It's like, oh, I really said that. And in some cases I get to hear myself sound like an idiot. So, but I was interesting that just this week, I re-listened to the episode we did about True Romance. Mm-hmm. And during that episode, so True Romance directed by Tony Scott, this movie that we're watching tonight, Unstoppable, directed by Tony Scott. And during our True Romance podcast, we talked about some of Tony Scott's work, and I said, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? And when I said, have you seen Unstoppable? You said no. And I said, we're going to have to do that on a future show. And here we are doing it. And I also listened to our episode of The Great Escape we did a few weeks back. And during that show, you had talked about ensemble films and how many ensembles you really enjoyed and this and that. And you said, oh, you know, we're going to have to watch The Cannonball Run. That's a great ensemble movie. And we just did that one too. So It was almost like we were prophesizing what's coming next. Yeah. So I thought that was good because often we'll say like, oh, hey, that was a great movie. We'll have to do that on a future show. And then we never get around to it. So it was kind of interesting to hear us off the cuff say we should do that. And then we actually did it. Look at that. We followed through for once. So if my wife's listening, I actually said I was going to do something and I did it for once.
What does the podcast sound like? Does it sound good? I
like to think it sounds good. We ramble a little bit too much sometimes, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so why this movie? Okay, so for a number of reasons. First of all, it's by one of my favorite directors, Tony Scott. We've already done Man on Fire, which is by Tony Scott, and we've done we just did True Romance, which is by Tony Scott. And I want to say we did one other one, and I can't think of it right now, but it'll come to me, I'm sure. And then this one, we'll probably end up getting through most of Tony Scott's films by the time we finish our podcasts, because you know, I think he's great, and I've seen all his movies, and I certainly want to give you an opportunity to see as many of them as you can. And if you're not going to watch them on your own, I'm going to force you to watch them as a part of this podcast. Sure. Okay. And he did Beverly Hills Cop 2, which we did Beverly Hills Cop 1 recently, but I think we both agreed that at some future point we'll probably do part 2. So so there was that. Okay. Yeah. Secondly, this is just one of those movies that I find is fun. So I obviously want to try and introduce you to movies that are newer, definitely past your 1989 threshold. Mm-hmm. But I always try and find something that's like from 2000 and onward, and anything I can find that's sort of 2010 and onward is gravy. It's bonus, because I know that the really new stuff you don't have an opportunity to watch, partly because you have young kids, partly because you're resistant to change. But this is one of those ones that
because I'm resistant to change.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, for sure. Again, draw your own conclusions, but I think that one's a pretty straight line. So I know this is one that you probably would not watch on your own. It's one of those ones that is on TV pretty frequently. It's one of these ones that, because it's on TV so frequently, I've seen it. I think if I say 10 times, if the over and under is 10, it's probably over, but it's probably around 10. And that's not to say that I've sat start to finish 10 times. Start to finish, I've maybe seen it 3 or 4 times. But there's enough action scenes in it, like interesting scenes, high octane scenes, and I'm like, okay, I know the scene is coming up. I'm going to watch just till the end of that, and then I'm going to go on doing whatever it was I was doing. And this movie's not going to win any Oscars. It's not that kind of movie. It's someone was asking me to describe, and I said it's sort of a thriller / action movie. It's about a runaway train, so you sort of know where it's going to go, or you think you know where it's going to go. There's only so much you can do with this premise, but it's still a pretty fun 90-100 minute premise. So I thought, you know what? Let's give it a watch. I hadn't seen it in 6 to 8 months. I mean, honestly, I've seen it in the last year for sure. But it's one of those ones that I know I enjoy every time it comes on. So I thought, let's just do it. Let's get this one under our belt. And I was kind of hoping you might enjoy it. I know sometimes you're definitely looking for more of that artsy fartsy kind of, you know, this is art. This is a great film. But from time to time, we do things like The Cannonball Run, where it's just this is just a fun movie. And that's sort of where this one falls for me. It's like, I just feel this is a fun movie. It's something that I enjoyed, and it's something I continue to enjoy, and I want to share it with you. And if you liked it, great. And if you didn't like it, well, you're wrong. But in any case, that's where we are.
Okay, so I agree with you. It was fun. This movie was fun to watch. It was definitely sort of a popcorn movie. There wasn't a lot, of substance to it, but it was fun to watch. I was able to get it on Disney Plus, and that got me thinking, because Disney Plus is obviously they're starting to add some movies that have some profanity, and violence. Maybe they're expanding their target market. I don't know. Maybe want to give Netflix a run for their money or something. But as I've mentioned before on the podcast, when it comes to watching movies here on the show, my wife either just goes to bed or she falls asleep halfway through the movie. But not this time. She actually stayed up and watched the whole movie with me. But the thing is, it wasn't because of the action or the pace or the plot. No, Derek.
It's Chris Pine.
It was Chris Pine. Yeah. She's like, oh, this guy's in it? Well, I guess I'll watch it. So this is the only movie she hasn't fallen asleep during. So I guess, watching movies and TV shows with my wife, it's a little bit of a blow to the ego, because between Chris Pine being hot and Charlie Hunnam's butt on Sons of Anarchy, I don't know. Although I guess it makes up for the Gen X Boob Fest movies I make her watch. So I guess
that's fair.
All a wash.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this movie, it's directed by Tony Scott, starring Denzel Washington, the aforementioned Chris Pine, the worst. I hate that guy. And Rosario Dawson. It had a budget of $85 million. It didn't make its budget back in the U.S. domestic box office.
Not in the box office, not initially. No,
it made $81 million domestically. But with worldwide grosses, it took in $168 million. It finished 41st at the box office in 2010. So I like to go back and look at, the box office from the years that we do this. So it was outperformed by such luminaries, Derek, as Dear John, The Other Guys, The Town, and Due Date.
Hey, The Town was really good. Don't knock that one.
Okay. But other movies that did well that year were, get a load of this, The Karate Kid, Clash of the Titans, Tron, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Wall Street, and The A-Team. 2010.
Nice.
If you didn't know any better, you'd think it was in the 80s. All those kind of titles. Geez, Hollywood. But anyway, so this movie it's apparently based on true events, because there was a statement at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, they changed some of the details. Instead of Scranton, Pennsylvania, it's Stanton. Because my wife was like, is there a Stanton in Pennsylvania? Like, didn't we go there once? I'm like, no, honey, that was Scranton. Yeah. She didn't believe me. Like, I don't know. Maybe she was just distracted by Chris Pine's stupid, beautiful face. I don't know. It's not that I'm bitter or anything.
Jealous much?
Yeah. But anyway,
and like you were saying, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
In the movie, the runaway train is number 777, and in real life, the runaway train was number 888. So again, it's those parallels to reality where they sort of borrow from the original story to give it some authenticity, but at the same time, it's like with Back to the Future when they say, well, why did the DeLorean have to go 88 miles an hour? And they're like, because it's a nice, easy number to remember. It's the same thing with the runaway train. They had to make the runaway train's number something easy to remember. So 777.
I want to talk about the director, because you brought him up. So Tony Scott, he's the brother of Ridley Scott. Pretty damn fine director in his own right. I think a lot of people think of Ridley Scott as the more talented director. But Derek, you've made it pretty clear that Tony Scott is one of your favorite directors of all time. He clocked in at number 2 on your list of best directors back when we did that episode on episode 140. In case anyone wants to go back and listen to our top 5 directors list. But Derek, you obviously you love Tony Scott. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what exactly it is about him, maybe in his movie style, that you like so much.
Well, and I think we had this discussion a little bit when we did Man on Fire. And I think Man on Fire was sort of a better example of Tony Scott at his best. And I think you asked me that on a previous one. You're like, if you had to pick, what would you say is his best film, or what would you say is your favorite movie by Tony Scott? And for me, that's Man on Fire all day long. Mm-hmm. But I find that with a lot of directors, in my mind, it's a very binary option. They either know how to make a good movie or they don't know how to make a good movie. And that's not to necessarily even say that it's a good movie in the sense of this is going to win an Oscar good movie, as much as it's just enjoyable entertainment. Like Michael Bay is a director that, for the most part, I think he knows how to make a good movie. he makes blockbuster films with explosions, and like he has a style. And if you know that, and that's something you enjoy, then when the next movie by that director comes out, you're like, it's probably going to be more of the same. I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt and go see it. And I mean, that's the same with Ridley Scott or with any of the newer directors that are working. Christopher Nolan puts out a movie. If you're like, I liked Batman, I liked Inception, I liked The Prestige, you're like, hey, he's got a new one. You know what? I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he knows how to make a good movie. Tony Scott was one of those for me. He had enough in his resume that I liked. He did Top Gun. He did Beverly Hills Cop 2. He did Enemy of the State. He did True Romance. So it's like it comes time for movies like Man on Fire and Unstoppable. I'm like, I'm in. I'm all in. Like I've enjoyed the vast majority of their body of work, which is not to say that they don't have misfires. Every artist has some misfires. Every director has a few stinkers in their resume. Even Steven Spielberg has some pretty big stinkers in his resume. But you hold up Schindler's List, Jaws, Jurassic Park, E.T., and that guy knows how to make a movie despite a couple of stinkers. And I'm not saying Tony Scott's as good as Steven Spielberg. They're not even in the same league. Very few directors are ever going to be in the same league as Steven Spielberg. But I think Tony Scott has an interesting style. He has an interesting way to set the pacing of his movies. He has a lot of movies where, the pacing is a very important part in the kind of movies he tends to make. I mean, not being a director or a movie person myself, I don't necessarily have the vocabulary. I'm pulling Yancey. I don't have the right words to describe what I'm trying to say, but I enjoy his work. I've enjoyed, it's unfortunate that he's no longer with us, so we're not going to get any new work from him. But I find for the vast majority of his IMDb credits, I've liked just about everything I've ever seen by him.
So for me, coming into this, not knowing a lot of his work like you do, one of the things I noticed was his style has a lot to do with momentum.
Yes.
Like it's not just how he shoots the script, and paces the plot, but he uses this kind of frenetic shooting style. He uses wipes across the frame, and he's got these quick zooms and pans, and he edits shots together from multiple directions. And the other thing is he seems to like to tell a story from different points of view, sometimes all at the same time. Yeah. It's definitely true in this movie. And he has the unique distinction, Derek, of directing one of the few movies that you've dominated on this podcast that I've actually loved. And that was 93's True Romance, which you mentioned. And we covered that back on episode 173. He died very young. He was 68. And he died by suicide from jumping off the Vincent Thomas Bridge in Long Beach, California. Mm-hmm. But like you mentioned, he left behind a legacy of some really, really good movies, And, I mentioned this when we did the True Romance episode. He started his Hollywood career with The Hunger back in 1983. Yeah. And that is one hell of a bold way to start your directing career. And like you mentioned, he did Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop 2. And I think it's safe and he was a producer. Like he was a prolific, especially later. Like he produced his production company, Scott Free, Scott Free, which is I believe is a joint with him and his brother Ridley Scott and Tony Scott, hence the Scott Free part of it. They have produced a ton of stuff. So like, again, I'm just looking at some of his things, like the TV series The Good Wife. They were executive producers on all the episodes. There's a number of mini series that they did. The TV show Numbers that ran for 6 seasons. They did over 100 episodes of that. There's a lot of good television, like series and mini series that they've done. And then there's a handful of movies that they may not have directed, but they were producers. Like, again, The A-Team is one you just mentioned a minute ago. They produced that. Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, another movie about a train, the remake, they did that. So there's a lot of good stuff on his resume, despite the fact that he took his own life due to depression, and I want to say it was 2012. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe it was. And I want to say thanks to you for kind of opening my eyes a bit to some of his work, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have explored a lot of it. So I think he's one of the better directors, that Hollywood's ever had. Like, he really is. I don't know if I'd be quite as high as you were. Like, I wouldn't rank him number 2.
No, that's fair.
On my list,
fair.
but he's quite good. So I want to talk about
So I was going to say he worked with Denzel Washington on 5 different feature films. And again, like with so many other people in the movie making industry, people tend to work with people they know, that they like, that they worked with before, that get a good reco. I was listening to one of our older podcasts a couple of weeks ago, or rather just this week, where we were doing one of the older trivia segments. And you were talking about Christopher Nolan and how he's worked with Michael Caine. I think you said something like 7 times. And Yancey was trying to come up with the 7 movies that they had done together. And that's typical with Tony Scott too. He had his list of favorites. And if you look through, there's a lot of, especially in the supporting roles, there's a lot of people that appeared in many of his movies over and over and over again. And it's clear that he had an eye for talent. I mean, Denzel Washington, one of the most talented people working in Hollywood. Obviously the two of them got along really well. And I think that speaks to the ability of the director to get actors of that caliber that want to keep working with you. They obviously feel you know what you're doing as well. So anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
No, but you find that a lot, like where directors like to work with, actors like Martin Scorsese worked with De Niro for years, and then DiCaprio. So that's a good point. You mentioned Denzel Washington. What can you say about this guy? Like, I mean, the dude has got some acting chops. He's definitely come a long way since Carbon Copy with George Segal back in 1981. I was
thinking St. Elsewhere myself. That's where I was.
No, I'm going all the way back to 81 to Carbon Copy. He's been nominated for 8 Academy Awards. He's won 2 of them. He won for Glory in 89 and then again for Training Day in 2001.
He was superb in Training Day. He was so good.
Yeah. He was good in that.
We'll have to do that on a future podcast. That's a great movie.
Yeah. I watched that one time. It was quite good. You mentioned he's worked with Tony Scott multiple times. He brings a level of professionalism and almost gravitas to any movie he's in, except maybe for Carbon Copy. But we'll give him a pass for that one. Okay. But he does a really good job here in this movie. And it's interesting.
Sorry, let me interrupt. Yeah. He does. So to piggyback on that, not only does he do a good job, but he spends the majority of the movie in one spot. They're in the cab of the locomotive, and he's literally sitting down for the majority of his screen time. And that has got to be a difficult performance for any actor, that day after day you're going to be in the same scene on the same set. You're going to be in the same clothes, because it's all supposed to take place in just a few hours of the same day, and yet you still have to perform. And I've got to think that that's exceptionally difficult to do well. It really comes down to the way you use your voice, the way you use your facial gesture and your expressions, and that's part of what Denzel Washington is known for, is being able the different intonations of his voice and expressing emotion through his voice work. But again, just the facial expressions, he's just so good in so many levels, given that he had such limitations, the way this role was played out.
And that's a good point. And not only does he have to do a lot of his acting from one place, but he's also the co-hero. So he doesn't get to hog the limelight. He has to share it with Chris Pine, right? And he does a good job of that. I mean, Tony Scott seems to give his characters a bit of subtext, like any good director should. And he definitely does that here, like with their personal lives and things like that. And speaking of Chris Pine again, I just don't like this guy. No, so he was in that Star Trek remake that you made me watch.
He's Captain Kirk in the new Star Trek movies.
But other than that, I've never really seen him in anything.
He was in a great movie I watched recently it was an older film before Star Trek called Bottle Shock, about the California wine scene in the 1970s, and he was really good in that too.
Well, and he wasn't in any movies before 1989, so how the hell would I ever see him? But
fair enough.
I guess he's what's considered to be a good actor for this generation, Derek. Is that right?
He can hold his own. I mean, I don't think he's going to win an Oscar anytime soon, but I mean, he's also
Probably
appeared
fair.
in the latest Wonder Woman films, but I assume for those, it's just he's eye candy, and he's there to be the male equivalent of the damsel in distress, so that Wonder Woman can save him. So he's got to be pretty, and hey, he's pretty, so fits the bill there.
And you mentioned damsel in distress, but the opposite of that, I think, is Rosario Dawson. So now she worked with Denzel Washington in Training Day too. She had significantly more clothes on this time around.
No, I don't think that was her. I think that was Eva Mendes you're thinking of.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
Rosario Dawson is great. So
she
keep
was.
going.
I thought she was really good in this movie. She was strong, and it's not easy or can't be easy to work alongside Denzel. He's a legend, you know. And even though they don't share any screen time until the very end scene, I thought she did a really good job in this role. I liked her a lot. I thought she was good. So,
yeah, she's pretty talented. I think she's underrated. I think that she is in a movie where there are very few female parts. She brings a lot to the table, and her role is pretty pivotal, right? She's the literal operator here. She's the middle person. What we in the old days would call a middleman. She's the middle person between the management and the train, and she's the person who's relaying the information back and forth, and she's the one who's identifying the problems and trying to come up with the solutions. She's essentially the handler of this film, and she's the center point where all the other characters interact, and all of the information comes through her, and it's an important role. And given that there are so few female characters in this film, I was glad to see that this was the one that, if you're going to put a woman in one of the roles, this, if she can't be in the train, which I mean, she totally could have been. One of those two characters in the train could have been a dude, especially the Chris Pine one could have been a woman. This was a good secondary choice.
So, yeah, I think you're right. She wasn't the one that was naked in the Training Day movie with him. But she was in, was it the remake of Josie and the Pussycats or something like that?
I don't. Honestly, I'm not that familiar with her resume. I know she was in Clerks 2. I know she was in the Marvel Universe. I think she was in the Daredevil TV series on Netflix, if I remember correctly. Daredevil, Luke Cage, Defenders, Iron Fist. Yeah.
One other actor I want to mention is Kevin Dunn. So he's the guy that plays Galvin. I recognized him right away. And he's one of those guys. Those character actors you can't quite
I recognize him here. I think he was the dad in the Transformers movie. He played
he might have been.
What's his name? Shia LaBeouf's dad in the Transformers film. That's where I remember him from. But now that I'm looking up his IMDb, he was in the movie Dave with Kevin Kline.
He was in Mississippi Burning, a movie you mentioned I think just last week on the podcast.
He was in that?
Yes, he was in the Godzilla remake. The one from 98 with Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick one?
Friggin' millennials probably think that was the original.
It was terrible.
Oh, yeah. But like I say, people might think that's the original Godzilla. It's not, But that was 1954's Godzilla from Japan. But we'll have to maybe delve into that another time. But anyway, so Kevin Dunn, he was in the second episode ever of Seinfeld. He was Jerry's old friend, Joel Hornick. Remember, Jerry doesn't want to meet up with him.
I'm not a big Seinfeld fan, and I never really watched the show. I've come to it lately in reruns, and even then, I've probably only seen about a third of the episodes.
So I think where I remember him the best one from was Cheers. He played a bar regular, Jim McNulty. I used to love Cheers. Man, that was a good show. But anyway, so the movie itself. So at the beginning of the movie, a couple of things. So the train operator jumps out to throw a switch or something like that, and he full throttles the train because it's a really long train. It's very heavy, and he needs to get it kind of up and moving. So he puts it on, full speed to overcome the inertia or whatever. And then he can't catch up to the stairs, to go up to the engine car. So my question was, at this point, the train's still going super slow. It's just getting moving. Why not just jump on the side stairs of the second or the third car and then just walk between the cars to the engine and take the wheel?
Yeah, I thought of that too. And given that I've seen it a few times, I think I have an answer for you because I figured you would ask that question. Mm-hmm. So if you recall, before he left the train, he moved one of the switches to what I assume was something of a brake or a neutral sort of position so that it would keep moving but not gain speed. And then when he jumps out, the train sort of shuffles a bit and you see the control knob changes gears and he's unaware that it changed gears. So I think what we're supposed to understand and again, it's loosely based on true events. So this may have been what actually happened was His expectation was the train is running in neutral. It's not expected to go very much faster. I can easily get out, flip the switch, get back in. Because if I stop it for realsies, stop it and do this, it's going to take a lot of time. And they've already established that this guy's kind of a screw up and a jerk off, and they've been dilly-dallying around. And so he's behind schedule. So he doesn't want to lose time. So in order to save time and take this shortcut, he puts it in neutral. He jumps out, flips a switch, expecting it to jump back in. Now, he can't catch up to the train, partly because he's overweight and out of shape. I believe that in his mind, he believes this train is in neutral. It'll roll down the tracks a little farther, and then eventually it'll just slow itself down because it's not under power. What we learn not long after that is it is indeed under power, and now we have the whole point of the movie is this train is in full throttle. The brakes have not been applied as he thought they had, and it's a runaway train. So that's the only logical reason I could think of for why he wouldn't have just jumped on the second car or the third car or shouted to all those other people who were standing around laughing at him, hey, it's a runaway train, somebody jump on board. I don't think that they believed that it was under power, and they assumed eventually it would just slow down enough and stop.
Okay, so you mentioned Runaway Train. This is not the first movie ever about a runaway train, and it's not even Tony Scott's first movie about a runaway train, because he made The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 the year before this came out, and there was a movie that was actually called Runaway Train. I never saw it, but it starred Jon Voight and Eric Roberts. Jon Voight was nominated for a Best Actor Oscar, and Eric Roberts was nominated for Best Supporting Actor back in 1985 for that movie. And then there was a movie called Silver Streak back in 76.
Oh, that sounds familiar. I might have seen that one.
It was the first movie with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. Man,
oh, that's why I've seen it.
They were so good together. Stir Crazy is, it's still one I got to have us do on the podcast here.
I watched that like in the last year. It was not as great as I remembered it being.
This should be interesting. I remember watching a movie when I was a kid called The Cassandra Crossing. And although I think the train might have been hijacked by terrorists or something like that in that one, you know, instead of just being like an unmanned runaway train. But anyway, this whole concept has been explored obviously before, but I feel this one was entertaining. But the thing is, this movie to me is a bit like Chinese food. You know, it's great while you're doing it, but afterward you're like hungry for more. You know, yeah. It was good, but it was.
That's fair.
It was kind of forgettable a bit. I don't know. So
I think you described it accurately at the beginning by saying it's a popcorn movie. It's a thriller. It's a blockbuster kind of. I'm just going in. I turn my brain off. I want to be entertained. Here's this thriller movie about this runaway train. Oh my God, it might crash into stuff and people could get hurt, and that's terrible. And along the way there are these little sequences where, it smashes into a horse-drawn a carriage for drawing horses. It smashes. They try and derail it, and it just smashes that thing. It smashes the last few cars of the train that can't quite get into the switch fast enough. And you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's hauling hazardous chemicals, and if it hits stuff, it could blow up, and people would die. And oh my God. And so you have that whole buildup of, oh my God, this could be this disaster, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And every time they try and stop it, things go wrong. They put another train in front of it to slow it down, and that blows up. And then they have a guy in a helicopter, and he can't get on. And it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then, without ruining it, but of course ruining it, eventually the heroes catch up and they stop the train and all the rest of that good stuff. But knowing and expecting that's how it's going to end, it's still a pretty thrilling 90 minutes to get there. And I enjoy it every time.
Yeah, it is. I have some questions, though, as always. You alluded to this earlier. Okay, so first of all, you're my go-to guy on this, Derek. So you're going to, Kevin Dunn's character, I mentioned Galvin.
Yes.
Why wouldn't he at least let them try and hook up to stop the train? Like, I understand it's a plot point.
I have the absolute answer for you.
And the corporate guy is always the bad guy, right? But like, what harm was there in at least letting them try?
You want to know the answer?
Yes.
Old white guys are stupid.
Yes.
And old white guys think they're always right. And especially when a woman's voice is telling you not to do it, of course the old white guy's not going to do it. That's just the way things have been for so long. And even though this movie is 11 years old, the people that wrote it, produced it, and directed it knew enough that this is an easy way to demonstrate to the audience that this old white guy who's in charge of this train company is every bit as typical as every other old white guy, and he's just going to do what's best in his mind, and he's not going to accept opinions or answers from anybody that isn't like him. And that may not be entirely true, but I think we can probably draw that conclusion pretty accurately. And I think this movie does a good job of sort of playing some of the standard tropes of these kinds of movies. You have the person played by Rosario Dawson who is doing the right thing for the right reasons. I care about the people. I care about the lives that could be lost. I'm recommending a course of action that will resolve our problem, despite the fact that it may cost the company money, because it will save lives. And on the other hand, you have the corporate people. How much will this devaluate our stock? And we have to have a meeting about this. And did you notice in that meeting, again, it was 10 people and they were all old white guys. And that's typical of these kinds of movies. Who's making the decision? The people that have the power and have the money. And who's coming up with the great ideas? It's the woman on the phone and it's the man of color behind the train. But you can't listen to those people because they're different than me. And I'm an old white guy. I must clearly know the right thing. And I think this movie does it without doing it too bluntly, but sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily know if these were conscious decisions they made when they made the movie, but it definitely is reflective of the way it's been for a long time. And it's a good way to point out that just because you're an old white rich guy doesn't mean you know everything. And there's a lot of times that other people can have great ideas and you should listen to them from time to time.
That's an interesting point, because there always seems to be one character in a movie like this that nobody listens to. And they plead and plead and they try to do what's right. No one ever listens. And I get that it's a strong plot point, and that's why the screenwriters do it. But something you brought up that I think is worth just discussing is that they often cast a woman or a person of color in this kind of role. And maybe it's just me, but I'm not sure the reasoning why, but it always seems that this character's right, or at least trying to do the right thing. Yeah. And no one listens. And it causes all drama for the plot. I get it. But like, I'm thinking of like Yaphet Kotto and Sigourney Weaver in Alien. Mm-hmm. And there's always that corporate executive type. Remember when you had me watch Aliens? And Paul Reiser, or Kevin Dunn in this movie, and for here, it's almost like Rosario Dawson kind of takes on that role too, as well as Denzel. But anyway, it's a trend that I've noticed and you've touched on in these action movies. It's an effective plot point, but it's I don't know. That's interesting.
I think it's reflective of unconscious bias. It's or maybe even not so unconscious. I think in some cases, in some of the movies, especially the more recent movies that we've talked about, it's more of a deliberate choice to make a point. Mm-hmm. But I think in some of the movies that are a little bit older, but not like 70s and 80s, it's more of a unconscious bias kind of thing where they do it that way because they realize that it's going to evoke a certain emotional response from your audience. Maybe not realizing why at the time, but you look back at it 10 years later and you go, yeah, that's why. And it's again, we've got a lot of different dichotomies going on here. You've got the corporation wanting to do one thing, and the person who, in this case, played by Rosario Dawson, has ideas for how to solve the problem, despite it's completely devoid of dollars and cents being weighed into the decision, going more for the loss of life or the absence of loss of life by doing a certain course of action. And same with the train. You've got the rookie and you've got the experienced guy. Well, you got the rookie who's saying, no, we shouldn't do this. Oh, we should pull into the first sidetrack. And you got the experienced guy saying, the manual tells you this thing, but my life experience has taught me this other thing. And you have to trust that I am the teacher in this scenario and I know what I'm talking about. And don't pull rank on me simply because you are the guy with the last name who has the connections, who's the new hot commodity. Like, you have to trust that I know what I'm talking about. And you see this kind of things play out in a lot of movies. And I think this film does lean on those tropes a lot. And I think but it leans on them in all the right ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just two more things I want to just touch base on before we wrap it up. One thing I noticed was there's this roar sound that you hear when the train's barreling down the tracks. Yep. Not just the sound of the train, but it's like this overdubbed thing. and it's like this ominous roar. And it reminded me, you remember that Steven Spielberg made-for-TV movie Duel? Do you ever hear about that?
I know of it, but I've never seen it.
So at the end of that movie, when the truck barrels over the side of the cliff, there's this ominous roar.
Hey,
sound.
spoiler alert. I just said I've never seen it.
Well, it's from like 73. So, okay. I mean, if you haven't seen it by now. But then Spielberg used the same sound, the exact same sound, at the end of Jaws, when the shark is like sinking to the bottom of the ocean after it gets its head blown off. And for me, being a huge Jaws fan, it sounded like the exact same sound here when the train's rolling along. They put it in more than once. Like it's probably like 5 or 6 times. So anyway, that was one thing I noticed.
I read that in the trivia that was a deliberate choice by the director to use animal sounds or things that sounded like animal sounds to make the train seem more threatening. So you're absolutely right in your auditory observation.
I want to talk about the ending. So for the final scene, which was very tense, by the way. Yep. So again, kudos to Tony Scott because he pulled off a lot of tense.
Yeah, I mean, you know how it has to end, right? It's like if it doesn't end with a happy ending, it ends with millions of people dying in a fiery explosion, and you're not going to end a movie that way. So you know how it's like watching Apollo 13 and going, well, I hope the astronauts make it home safe. It's like, well, the movie would kind of suck if they didn't, but you still watch that movie and the ending still has you on the edge of your seat. This is the same idea. You know how it has to end. You know there's only 5 minutes left. You know exactly where the movie's going to go, but it's still thrilling to get there.
But like you said, it's pretty edge of your seat stuff, like it really was. When Chris Pine jumps across and gets into the engine room and then he gets control of the train and then he stops it. So I gotta confess, I was totally expecting something else to happen at this point. Like there seems to be a tendency in Hollywood movies, lately for the end to not be the end. If you know
like Die Hard. Where at the last minute the guy shows up and tries to shoot them again.
Yeah. It's
no,
like
I know exactly.
False ending, or misdirect or whatever.
Yep.
And more than once, you've seen, where a movie gets to the end and then you think it's over and it's not. So like I was thinking like Chris Pine, jumps into the engine car and then I would have just loved for him to say, I'm a rookie. I just started. I only got this job because of my uncle. I don't know how to drive this thing, or something like that. Yep. Or he gets in and he stops the train and then like something else happens. All of a sudden that like the train goes into autopilot and restarts or the train stops and the freight car with all the explosives, I don't know, like it keels over or something like that and they have to, panic to make it all happen. So, I was going to also mention too, we're watching the end of the movie and it's like super tense, just like we mentioned. And Chris Pine's in the back of that pickup truck and he's going to jump over onto the train. Yeah. My wife accidentally turned off the TV. Oh, geez. Like she sat on the remote or something like that. Derek, I like it better when she falls asleep. But don't tell her. Anyway, so overall, I thought the movie was pretty good. Do you want to rate it out of 10, Derek?
I'd give it a 7 or a 7.5, depending on the day of the week. It's, again, I love the cast. I love the director. Mm-hmm. It's just a fun movie. It's not going to win an Oscar, but it knows its lane. And when you're on tracks, you have to stay in your lane. But it knows its lane. It stays in its lane. It delivers the kind of thing I expect it to deliver, given the kind of movie it is. I've seen it a bunch of times. I feel it's got a rewatchability factor for me anyway. Even though I know how it's going to end, I'm thrilled to watch it over and over again. I'm going to give it a 7, solid 7.
You and me are on the same page. I would give it a 7. I thought it was pretty suspenseful in parts. It kept you riveted, but it was also a movie that you're likely to forget about after a while. Like, I don't think it'll be considered a modern classic or anything.
No, I don't.
But it's a lot of fun to watch.
It is. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you had a chance to watch it. And like I said, being that it's by one of my favorite directors, I'm glad that I was able to introduce you to it. But of all of the movies by Tony Scott, if someone said to me, you know, you've got the entire Tony Scott library to go back and rewatch a movie, this is never going to be the first one I go back to watch. I'm going to watch Beverly Hills Cop 2. I'm going to watch Man on Fire. I'm going to watch True Romance. I think he's got a lot of other movies in his library that I would go to before I go to this one for a rewatch. But if you've never seen this one, I'm certainly going to recommend it.
Yeah. Okay, on that, let's have some
Fun with Caveman.
All right, Derek, I'd like to keep things pretty simple, you know,
Okay.
when it comes to having some trivia fun. So one thing that I like to do, as you've probably noticed, I like to have a bit of a common thread, you know, through all the answers. So here we go. So, Derek, we've done this before. I'm going to give you the year and the synopsis, and all you have to do is name the movie, okay?
Okay.
So the common thread here tonight is all the movie titles begin with the letters UN. Just like Unstoppable. Okay, so all these movies begin with un. Okay.
Okay.
So now there could be a the in front of it. Just
That's
keep
fair.
that in mind.
That's
okay?
fair. Okay.
All right. So you ready?
Yes.
All right. 1987. During the era of Prohibition in the United States, federal agent Elliot Ness sets out to stop ruthless Chicago gangster Al Capone, and because of rampant corruption, assembles a small handpicked team to help him.
That was The Untouchables.
It was The Untouchables. Okay, 1992. Retired Old West gunslinger William Money reluctantly takes on one last job with the help of his old partner Ned Logan and a young man, the Schofield Kid.
I love this movie. Unforgiven. Chris, have you seen Unforgiven?
I have not.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a little slow, but man, is it good.
Okay, you're doing really well. Okay, so 1989, a bachelor and all-around slob babysits his brother's rebellious teenage daughter and her cute younger brother and sister.
Wow. That doesn't even sound familiar. And it's got "un" in it. Uncle Buck.
Very good. Yes. Okay. This is more into your wheelhouse. 2006, a real-time account of the events on one of the planes hijacked on September the 11th, 2001, that crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, when passengers foiled the terrorist plot.
This I've never seen it, but I've heard it's excellent. It was United 93, I believe is the title.
Very good. 1993, a waitress hardly notices a shy busboy who secretly loves her, until one night she's attacked and he comes to her rescue. From there, a relationship sparks, but one secret could mean disaster for these fated lovers.
Wow. That does actually sound very familiar. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to come up with it. I got to pass.
You know this. It's Untamed Heart.
I don't know that. Who's in that?
Christian Slater. We talked about it on the episode.
I've never seen it.
All right. 1992. Two rival soldiers who were killed in Vietnam are brought back to life in a top secret military experiment that creates superhuman warriors.
Was this Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren in Universal Soldier?
Jean-Claude Van Damme, you nailed that one. Okay.
I've never seen it, but
Me neither.
I know what it's about.
Okay. Yeah. 2000. A man learns something extraordinary about himself after a devastating accident.
That was one we did on our podcast. That was Unbreakable.
Not only did we do this on the podcast, this was the very first movie that you had me watch after you joined the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, 1981. A visiting dignitary, a CIA agent, a Nazi spy, Japanese tourists, an assassin, and a group of midget actors from The Wizard of Oz all check into an elite Los Angeles hotel during the making of the 1939 movie classic.
Wow. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to have to watch it. What's it called?
It's Under the Rainbow.
Wow. No, I've never heard of it. Have you seen it?
Never heard of it? It's with I saw it in movie theater when it came out. It was Chevy Chase and Carrie Fisher. I got this synopsis from IMDb, and they use the word midget. Are you allowed to say that word? I don't think we're allowed to say that. I don't know.
I don't know, but that sounds fascinating. I'm going to have to go back and watch it.
It was awful. It was so
okay.
Dumb.
Maybe not.
It's so dumb, and it was a huge bomb. Okay, 1964. A poor, uneducated mountain girl leaves her cabin in search of respect, a wealthy husband, and a better life in this fictionalized biopic of Margaret Brown, who survived the 1912 sinking of the RMS Titanic.
I'm going to take a wild guess here because I have no idea. Was it The Unsinkable Molly Brown?
Well done. Okay.
Wow. Total stab in the dark.
Two more. You got this. 2002, a New York suburban couple's marriage goes dangerously awry when the wife indulges in an adulterous fling.
Unlawful Entry?
No. Unfaithful.
No.
Diane Lane.
Diane Lane?
Gere, yeah.
Saw that in the theater, actually. Yeah.
1927 and again in 1977.
Okay.
Broken and beaten to the point of no return, a sadistic plantation owner pushes his slaves to the point of rebellion.
Wow. I have no idea.
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Oh, geez. I had no idea that's what that was about.
Yeah.
I knew it was a whole slave and racism thing, but no idea. Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't throw in Undercover Brother.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing that one, and there's Undercover Brother 2 as well.
They made a sequel out of that?
Yeah, they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, you did pretty good. You know,
I missed a few, but
yeah. So next week, Derek, we're going to come back with a topic. So we'll have to figure what that's going to be, and we'll decide that between now and next show. But it was a lot of fun. I again, it wasn't a classic or anything, but Unstoppable, I thought was pretty good.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. So until next week, when we come back with something different, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.